It was amazing as always. Grandma's turkey was perfectly roasted, the stuffing was just right, and the mashed potatoes were creamy and rich. I think that's why it took us so long to notice something was off. We'd been eating for about an hour when my cousin Lucy asked for more rolls. I glanced at her plate, expecting to see crumbs and maybe a bit of mashed potatoes left. But her plate was full. And it wasn't just her. Everybody's plates were still heaping, the food untouched, yet everyone was eating as if it were their last meal. I leaned over to my sister, Emma, nudging her shoulder. "Hey, you good?" I whispered, glancing at her plate. It looked the same as before she'd started eating, yet she had a spoonful of potatoes poised at her lips. She nodded absent-mindedly, shoveling in another bite, and for a second, I caught that same distant strange look in her eyes that I'd seen in Grandma's earlier. As the hours stretched on, I began to feel sick. It wasn't that I'd eaten too much, it was the unnaturalness of it all. No matter how much we ate, the food on the table remained untouched, like an endless feast that refilled itself. I tried to tell my dad, but he just waved me off, looking annoyed. "Stop worrying, eat, it's Thanksgiving," he said, his voice muffled as he chewed. It was almost 9 o'clock when Grandma stood up, her chair scraping against the floor as she pushed it back. The clinking of forks against plates went silent as we all looked at her. She raised a glass, her voice strong but hollow as she spoke. "I'm so grateful for all of you being here tonight," she began, her eyes glassy and far off. "Family is everything. And tonight is special. Tonight we all stay together." Her words sent a shiver down my spine and I glanced around the table. My family looked different, almost like they were fading in and out of focus. Everyone was still eating, but their faces had grown pale, skin stretched tight across their faces, eyes sunken and blank. I was the only one who hadn't taken another bite, and I started to feel dizzy, like I was the only real person in a room full of ghosts. I decided to leave, get some fresh air, maybe even get back to town if I could find a ride. I tried standing up, but Grandma's voice cut through the air, sharp and final. "Sit down, dear," she said, her voice dripping with an authority that felt unnatural. My body locked up and I sat back down, feeling her eyes boring into me. "You're not finished yet?" Around the table, everyone kept eating, faces slack and vacant, like puppets being forced to perform. I couldn't look away from the sight of their hands moving mechanically, lifting forks, chewing, swallowing. And that food, it was like it was devouring them, not the other way around. Then Grandma turned and gestured toward the kitchen. "He's almost here." I didn't know who she was talking about, but just as she said it, a deep rumble of thunder echoed through the house and the lights flickered. When they came back on, someone else was standing in the doorway to the dining room. I didn't recognize him, but he was tall, dressed in an old, faded suit, with skin so pale it was almost translucent. He smiled, and there was something about his expression that made my stomach twist. "He's here to join us," Grandma said, her voice reverent. I looked around at my family. No one else reacted, they just kept eating, their faces blank and expressionless. The stranger walked over to the table, his steps slow and deliberate, and took the seat Grandma offered. He looked at me and I swear his eyes were like empty pits, drawing in the light around him. "You're lucky," he said softly, his voice a strange, distorted echo. "Your family has been chosen to feast with me." I glanced at the food on the table, at the endless piles that no one could finish, and I realized this was no ordinary Thanksgiving dinner. This was something ancient, something that had trapped us, ensnared us in a ritual we couldn't escape. I wanted to run, to scream, but my body wouldn't obey. I was frozen, trapped by his gaze. Hours passed and the eating continued. I don't know how long it went on, but by the time the first hints of dawn began creeping through the windows, my family's faces looked more hollow, their bodies thinner, more frail. Grandma, too, was starting to fade, her skin taking on a sickly pallor, eyes blank as she ate over and over, like she was trying to fill some unending void. Finally, the stranger stood up, nodding approvingly as he surveyed the table. "You've done well," he said, his voice low and hollow. As he walked back toward the kitchen, he turned to me. "Remember this night. And next year you'll know what to do." And then he was gone. Just like that, he disappeared as if he'd never been there at all. The door to the kitchen swung shut behind him, and with it, the spell was broken. My family blinked, looked around, seeming to come back to themselves, but something was wrong. They were thin, skeletal, their eyes vacant, and their movements slow. They didn't remember anything from that night. They just looked at their empty plates, confused, like they'd just woken from a dream. We tried to go on with life, but things were never the same. My family began to waste away no matter how much they ate. My dad's jokes grew stale, my mom's laughter faded, and my sisters barely left their rooms. Thanksgiving came again this year, and they talked about going back to Grandma's, but none of us could face it. As for Grandma, we haven't seen her since.